My video today is going to show you how to use inks and a paintbrush on pre-quilted fabrics. My supplies include Scarecrow all-purpose ink, Fabrico fabric markers, a couple pieces of coffee stir sticks, a little bit of clean water, a non-absorbent paper plate, baby wipes to clean up, paper towels. Instead of the normal applicators that I use with my ink, I'm going to be using a little flat chisel-edged paintbrush. Here's a close-up of my paintbrush. You can see that it's just a nice little about ½ artist paintbrush. I will also be using a white jelly roll pen to do highlights and eyes and other fine white marks. A jelly roll pen is permanent on fabric. I'm also going to be using a black fine-tipped marker and a white Prismacolor pencil. I'm starting by using my coffee stir stick to dip some ink out onto my paper plate. I'm going to edge my brush just into this ink and kind of rub it around a little bit and push it into the bristles and get the excess ink off of the end of the brush so that it's not wet and goopy. As in all my other videos, I always keep a test piece of fabric handy to try out the load onto my applicator before I actually go on to my project. So here we go, I'm going to test it out. This is pretty good. Let me show you what it looks like if you have too much ink left in your brush. I'm not going to bleed this off up here. I'm just going to put it straight in. And you can see how it leaves that little dark blob. I want this to have kind of a color craning effect. And this little blotch will draw your eye right to it. So I kind of want a little softer look than that. I'm going to put my brush back into my ink. And I'm kind of spreading it around and pushing it around. I want to kind of get a dry brush effect. So I want to push a lot of the liquid that's in this brush out of it. Now when we try this, you can see how I've got a soft color cranny-like effect here that comes in nice and soft and doesn't have that dark blob look on it. Okay, there it is a little farther back. See how nice and soft and even this is, and how uneven this little blob looks. It just kind of jars your eye. Now I want you to see how to actually come into the fabric and apply the ink. Here's where I want my ink. Here's where I don't. So I'm going to come in along this edge of my stitching and pull into my fabric. I'm kind of using, the arty term for it is a scumbling, I'm kind of squishing my paintbrush around and rubbing it around a little bit. And I can come back over, I can come back into that edge, but that flat edge of my brush then stays over here and doesn't bleed off into the bump of the fabric that the stitching created when it came and dented in these two pieces. I'm always pulling away from the edge into the body of my work. You can turn your work if you need to. Now my brush doesn't have much ink left in it, so I'm going to go back to my plate And I'm going to rub it into the ink just like I did before and rub out most of the ink. Touch it to my scrap and then come back in and continue to work. I've colored more of my Scarecrow pants, and I'm just coming in, and you can see how I'm just kind of rubbing my brush around. Just kind of scrubbing it off into that space. I went over here and filled up my brush and dusted some of it off again. Came back in, worked on the edge a little bit. Like all projects, you need to remember and establish your light source. You're going to build the ink up in layers just like you do crayon, or like I build up the ink in my other videos to create volume and shape, shading and light. When I'm ready to change colors, I clean my brush out in a little bit of clear water, just like you would any watercolor brush. I'm going to dab it out, make sure I have all of the paint out of it, because I'm going to switch to orange now for my pumpkin, and if I have any blue left in there, it will make my orange look dirty. So there you go. I'm nice and pretty much cleaned out now. I want to really squeeze my brush with my paper towel because I don't want any water left in my paintbrush, because it will thin the ink and cause it to wick out into the fabric where I probably don't want it. I've put out some orange and loaded my brush and tested it, and I'm going to start filling in my pumpkin. And remember, you want to work into the area that you're going to fill and away from the area where you don't want any ink. Now this pumpkin is all orange, but to make it look like it has all these sections in it, I want to work a section at a time and leave a light space, because your fabric is actually your highlight. So it's real easy just to fill in this little pumpkin. And begin to create volume and dimension in addition to the quilting that's already been done. Now I'm adding a little bit of more rusty orange. This is a color number 53 called Autumn Leaf, and this is set for a little while, and it's dry to the touch, but I'm putting it on really bride rush, so it's pretty dry to the touch anyway. Now I'm going to come in and deepen some of these shadow areas in here with another color. So I'm just layering one color over another and building up dark and highlight as I continue to work into my project. The chisel edge, the sharp edge of my little flat brush, lets me get down into the crevices between the sections. Here is another pumpkin that I've done, and this pumpkin's pretty much finished, and you can see how much rich color I can get in there, and I've stayed well within all of the lines. Now when I heat set this will be permanent, and I don't have to go over it again with any kind of textile medium or anything. It'll just be fine to go. I'm going to use a marker to begin filling in the straw. You can just kind of draw in the straw marks. You want to be kind of careful and not saturate the fabric and get this too heavy. I like to use it when I need lines, but it's very difficult to use a marker to get this soft graduation of color. I'm going to come back in with a sandy colored pen and start adding a little bit of shading. If I get it a little bit too dark in some place, I can take my dry, cleaned out brush and blend a little with it, but the pens don't blend nearly as well as the ink when it's been loaded onto the brush. I filled in my little Scarecrow's eyes with a black fine tip marker. It's small and does the trick and works perfectly well for that. But I came in and added little highlights to his eyes with my Jelly Roll pen, and I could just kind of dot 2 bright dots in there and maybe even give him a little bit of shine on his nose. And when the Jelly Roll pen is dry, it's permanent on the fabric, and I think that's kind of a nice way to add some really bright highlights when you can't leave them behind in your fabric. Last, on my Scarecrow, I want to add some highlights to his straw because I obviously couldn't leave enough space for the background fabric to show through and be the highlight. A white Prismacolor pencil is an excellent tool to do that. It's kind of waxy and opaque, and I just draw some sharp lines on there, and it brings in some really nice highlights to my straw. My sweet little Scarecrow in the pumpkin patch is finished. I added some borders and a binding, and I'm ready to hang it by my door for the holidays. This sweet little design is also from Nancy Hackett Wasatch Quilting, and I'd like to show you how to cover a fairly large surface quickly using these little daubers or a piece of foam and a rubber band. I have some nice snowflakes here. This is the end of a table runner that's part of that gingerbread house series I just showed you. I've put some more ink out on my plate, and I've taken my foam and my rubber band, and I've just folded my foam and wrapped a rubber band around the end to make myself a little dauber. And now I'm going to take my dauber and rub it into the ink. And I want to kind of do the same thing I was doing with my paintbrush. I want to push it way into that dauber and spread it out so that I don't have any blops of ink, if that's a term, on the end of this dauber. Because I don't want this to be spotty. I want it to kind of look like the night sky. So when I test it out, I want it to come out nice and soft and not dark and drippy. Okay, here we go. So easy. My dauber's all loaded, and I'm just going to start swirling it over the surface. And you can see how when I do this, it darkens the surface fabric, but it leaves all the snowflakes down in the dents, if you will, untouched by the ink. So it actually looks like you have a blue sky with white snowflakes behind it. And if you get it a little darker in some places, come back and put a little bit darker ink around that. Refill your dauber when you need to. I don't know if you can see this little line right here, but you got to be careful to keep your fabric smooth. Pull out from the stitching, just like we were drawing in from the edge. Kind of smooth it on there. See how that just fills up your fabric? Here's the finished piece, and I put some little crystals in the center of some of the snowflakes, but you can see how it just kind of fills up the background, but it leaves the snowflakes white. That was kind of a happy accident, but it turned out really great. So here's the whole piece again, and you can see what a nice effect that has. If you're interested in the inks or stitched out pre-quilted pieces, you can contact my friend B at B's Fabric, Fun, and Sewing in Paulsbo, Washington. And if you're a long armor and interested in the designs, you can contact my friend Nancy Hack at Wasatch Quilting in Utah, and I will put both websites at the end of this video. Thanks for watching.